Welcome to today's video about deductive reasoning. And deductive reasoning is a process of basically solving a problem where we give reason for solving the problem. So we tell what we're thinking. And there's a definition right here on the document that says what deductive reasoning is. In geometry, we often call it proof. And that's kind of what we're looking at. And how is this different from inductive reasoning? Well, inductive reasoning was following a pattern. And so if I gave you a pattern that looked like this and asked you what the next term was, you could probably tell me it was 8, then 10, and so on. This is a proof, and you'll see when I give you my examples what we're talking about. So in my first example, now both examples that I'm going to give you deal with algebra problems because that's what we're most familiar with. And so then when you come to class, in class we will do things that deal a little bit more with geometry, but I thought I'd give you algebra problems to kind of see what we're talking about. So to start out, the first thing you're going to do is basically I'm going to solve for x. That's what the problem is. I'm going to take this problem and solve it for x, and then I'm going to give a reason for each step in the process, and that's the proof part. Okay, so when it says give a reason, that's the proof part. So step number 1, I have to write down the problem itself. And I know that seems kind of silly to do this, but it is something that we have to do. So you'd say reason number 1. So over here I'm writing I'm over on this side I'm putting what I'm doing algebraically, and over here is my reasons. Sometimes we call this the statements over here. So then over here I'm going to say, oh, this was the given problem. And I'm just going to write given. So then step 2, I have to do something algebraically to simplify this. And so my first step is I'm going to distribute the 2 to both numbers inside the parentheses. So when I do that, I get 4x plus 2, and then my original problem continued on with plus 3 equals 25. So my reason for that step is distributive property. So my distributive property, that's what I did. And see, that's the hard part with the algebra is that you're probably not going to know the terms. I promise you, in geometry, we'll know all the terms and how we do them because that's what we're learning. So in step 3, then, I'm going to combine like terms, and you'll notice that the 2 and the 3 are like terms, so I'm going to combine those together. So I'll leave the 4x alone, and my next step. So as you can see, I'm just going along and solving the problem as I would normally in an algebra problem, but I am going through and over on this side just giving a reason for what I did. And so I'm combining like terms. And so then step 4, now I have to think about, now it's an algebra problem, so I have to do something, and I have to get x to stand alone. So I'm going to subtract 5 across the equal sign from both sides. Now you can show this step. I could say 4x plus 5 equals 25 and subtract 5 from both sides. And then that would mean that this would give me 4x equals 20, which is all step 4. And so in that step, I did subtraction property. And I'm just going to abbreviate property. So subtraction property. And then finally, I'm going to divide by 4, and that would be my final step to get my x. And so I'm just going to write it out. And you could just say x equals 5, but I'm going to write it out anyway. And so x equals 5 was my final step, and this was the division property. And so in order to solve this problem, it took us at least 5 steps to solve this problem. And this is what we're dealing with when we're talking about deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is not just solving the problem, it is giving my reason for solving the problem. So in my next example, it's kind of the same thing. It's another algebra problem, but it's a little bit bigger, so it's going to take us a few more steps, but the idea is still the same. So I'm going to give you another walkthrough of this. So remember that in step 1, we're going to write down our given problem. So 3 times 2x plus 1. And in this one, this is just the given statement. That's just what was given to us in the problems. And it seems silly to have to write that down, but we do write it down every time. So then the next step, I can do whatever I want algebraically, and remember in algebra you can solve in whatever order you want. So I'm going to solve it the way I see it, and the way I see it is I see that 2x plus 1 is the exact same thing as this 2x plus 1. So these guys are, in my mind, are like terms, the 2x plus 1s. So I can combine them. I have 3 2x plus 1s plus 2 2x plus 1s. So that means I have a total of 5 of them. And the rest of my problem will remain the same. And so my step 2 was combining like terms again. So then step 3, I am going to go through and distribute. So I'm going to take 5 and multiply it by 2x, and 5 and multiply it by 1, which will give me 10x plus 5. I left my 7 alone, leaving the 42 minus 5x alone, and so that was the distributive property. Abbreviate that again. And now, again, step 4, I'm going to combine like terms, so I leave the 10x alone. The 7 and the 5 are going to combine together to get me 12. So I, again, now, just like in step 2, and that's kind of why I wrote that, I was combining like terms. And then step 5, I now can start solving algebraically, thinking of how I'd solve the algebraic. And so first thing I do is I'm going to move the x across the equal sign. I want to get all my x's together. And so what would I do? Well, I would add 5 across the equal sign since it's a negative 5x. So I'm going to add 5x to both sides, and I'll just kind of lightly write it in with a different color. And so what I get over here is 15x plus 12 equals 42. Now this is starting to look more like an algebra problem you've seen before. And so what I changed was that by adding 5x to both sides, I ended up getting, that was my addition property of equality. And I'm going to do add prop, and that's fine, addition property of equality. And then now, again, an algebra problem, so I'm going to now subtract 12x across the equal sign. And so by subtracting 12 across, not 12x, just 12 across the equal sign to get my like terms together and try to isolate the x's, I end up with, for step 6, 15x equals 30. And so for step 6, I did a subtraction property of equality. And then finally, my final step is to divide by 15. And I end up with x equaling 2. That's what I'm looking for. And so to get to this step, I ended up doing the division property of equality. And so basically, this is just telling your thought process. What did you do to solve this big problem? And that's what all deductive reasoning is about.